Just got back from the hardware store. It's Tuesday morning, and I'm going to be installing a gas shutoff valve in the fuel line. That way I can eliminate the fuel solenoid on the bottom of the carburetor. This is one of the dumbest things I've seen in a long time. Briggs and Stratton can't get their carburetor float valve to shut off, so they stick on an electronic backup safety device that doesn't function. Really poor planning. So I'm going to pull off the carburetor, and then I'll remove the fuel solenoid and stick this in its place. All I'll have to do is, whenever I shut off the lawnmower, shut off this valve. Should just change out the carburetor. I have other carburetors I could put on here and just eliminate the solenoid valve, but then I would lose the ability to run the governor. The governor is kind of important on a lawnmower. So the first thing I need to do is take off the filter housing. So I'll remove these brackets. I suppose I could bring out the set of hex drivers that I have down in the basement. But then I'm just going to have to lug everything out here and then lug everything back, because I'm going to be doing the actual carburetor work down in the basement so that I've got a little bit better working conditions. Yesterday we had a high of 76. It was actually quite nice out here. Today we have a high of 60, and it hasn't made it yet. Pretty good winds, 10 to 15 miles an hour. Now, being out here in the tent, tractor shed, it's not blowing on me, but it isn't comfortable either. I do like these little cable mounts. Not my favorite, but as far as cable mounts go, they actually work pretty good. Okay. I got the bracket off of there. Having different colored sockets, I don't know that that's necessarily a big plus, but it is kind of nice that you can tell what they are by looking at them without having to read them. But then that means I'm going to have to memorize the colors. But it is a nice socket set, and it's deep well 1/4 inch drive, which is why I bought it. It's from Harbor Freight. A little set of Pittsburgh. They were inexpensive. Another reason to buy them. And I didn't have a set of deep well 1/4 inch drives. Actually, I would much rather be doing this in the garage. But the nice thing about working out here, I can just leave the mess sit. Now I have to pick up stuff just so I don't lose things. But it's not like I gotta move everything out to put the truck back in. And the tractor's sitting outside with a tarp over it. So it's relatively safe from the elements. And with nice weather, it's not too bad. Even today, like 60 degrees and blowing, it's not really uncomfortable out here. I've got a heavy shirt on, and that seems to be working quite well. Okay. Take that little hose off. There. Now I got to pull the carburetor off of the engine. And this is where having a deep well socket really comes in handy. There's one. There's the other. Now let's see, what have I got going on here? We have a little spring keeper on there. There we go. Now I'll lift this up above the fuel tank, and that way I can take off this hose clamp without having fuel leak all over the place. Okay, I need to take this solenoid off the bottom. And the best way to do that is to unscrew it, I guess, because it is fastened on with a thread. Now, this came in a box of junk, but, you know, tools are tools, you don't throw them away. I've never cleaned this up, I didn't need to, but today, this is the one that actually fits down inside that little spot. This one, which would fit the bolt, is too thick to go in there. But this little stamped steel, it's going to work just fine. Out she comes, nice and easy. And what this is, that's what the problem is. This little solenoid is supposed to slide back and forth. And when you put power on it, it's supposed to draw that down in and make it so that the fuel can go through this main jet. But this solenoid has been badly abused. It no longer slides back and forth. Now I don't know if this stuck up. There, the little spring went down, brought it back up again. You can see it's supposed to slide down like that, and then this is supposed to slide back up. As soon as you turn off the power, that's supposed to go up. And then back and forth like that. Now I suppose I could spend a lot of time and try and clean this thing up, but I'll bet, just from the shape of the crap coming out of there, it's pretty gunked up. And this little thing really doesn't do any good. All it does is make it so that the fuel doesn't run out of the fuel hose into the carb, overfill the float bowl, and run on into the manifold, flooding the engine. And eventually working its way down into the oil pan, where you have gas and oil mixed in an explosive mixture in a crankcase. Yeah, an enclosed space. Boom. Not a good idea. So what I'm going to do is set that off to the side and take a look inside here. Now that's the float. Ah, there was gas inside the carb. That's good. But I think, oh yeah, I can see this has been sitting a long time with fuel in it. You can see the varnish on that float. So I'm going to get the can of carburetor cleaner and clean this thing up. Pull this pin out. That lets me slide the float is stuck. Absolutely stuck shut. It's supposed to slip out of there. More than one problem with this thing. Now I've taken apart a couple dozen engines. Taken the same carburetor off at least 20 times on the same engine. And I have never, ever had as much trouble getting the float needle out of a carburetor. One of the problems that I was having is the float is made out of some kind of plastic. And plastic gets old, it gets brittle. So I had to be careful not to pull too hard on anything because I didn't want to break it. Because there's no way to fix it back, and didn't have much luck finding shear keys. I don't know how I'd find a float. Got it. That was seriously messed up. Glued in place. All the varnish actually stuck that little needle valve down in. Ended up prying it free. I've never had to pry a needle valve, a little float valve, out of its seat. Got a little plastic tip on it there that's supposed to shut off the fuel. Well, it was doing a fine job. It said the float was all the way up, and this was stuck. I used to clean carburetors with gasoline, and it works, it's effective. The carb cleaner is a little bit more aggressive. It dissolves the varnish a little quicker. this solenoid is no longer going to be doing anything as a solenoid. There's supposed to be a spring in there that pops this thing back and forth, and that is totally toast. So, going on the internet and finding information about this thing, the thing people say to do is to cut this pin right off, so that when the spring pushes it up, it won't shut off the fuel. That way I don't need to have power going to this thing to pull it back down again. Now I can buy a new one of these on eBay for 16 bucks. And I used to think, well, if you bought it on eBay, it's a knockoff and it's, you know, made in China and it's not really worth anything. Well, actually all of this crap is made in China anyway, so it doesn't matter if it's made in China or not. It's all made in China. And I'm pretty sure that the companies that are making it in China are making it for Briggs and Stratton. And then they're selling either seconds, which is possible. No rules on that, you know. Or they're selling firsts on the open market for the same price that they sell them to Black & Decker. Black & Decker adds another $34 onto the price, or more, and sells them through their stores. Kind of like those little shear keys. Now this is just a sediment trap. Because it's at the bottom of the carburetor, and all that junk that was in the bowl sets on this too. I mean, it's the same stuff. This threads into that and holds the bowl on to the carburetor. So anything that's in that bowl ends up in this thing, because there's a port in the side of this that acts as the high-speed jet, and then there's a little siphon line there. So whenever something gets into the float bowl, it goes right into that little seat and right out into this thing. And I'm pumping mud out of it now just doing that. So the suggestion is cut this little pin off. And I think that is a grand suggestion. I don't know what it's made out of. It's suggested that it gets ground off. I'm not adverse to that. I saw one guy tear one of these apart, and that's a possibility. I mean, it's a coil, and a little 12-volt coil that generates electricity. It's a little 12-volt coil that generates magnetism and pulls this plunger down. But I imagine these things have a shelf life and a useful life, and this was probably long past that. So I'm going to grind this off. This float should shut off when that is level in the float bowl. And this appears to be pretty close. So it must be they've hit a happy compromise on it, or just decided we're going to go with that. But that used to be one of the things that you did, is you'd hold the carb up like this and look and see if the float's level. Because you didn't want it to shut off too early. If it shut off too early, then you wouldn't get gas to the engine. If it shut off too late, then the float bowl would overfill and run out into the carburetor itself. Which is why they put this thing on, because that's what happened to them. So not having this adjustable makes it so they have to add on all this extra equipment, which to replace this thing is, I think, it's $50 plus. I'm not exactly sure how much plus, but it's $50 plus. If you're really fascinated by it, you can look it up. Time for lunch. Now we get to put the gas valve in. Now this came with fuel line and hose clamps, but I think I got better hose clamps to work with. And I'm going to shorten up this fuel line a bit too. Yep. Valve works. That's a big plus. The valve came with those spring type hose clips, and I just as soon have these screw type. I'm of the opinion that I'd rather draw them down snug than have them flopping around all over the place. This little ratcheting cutter came out of the dumpster at Harbor Freight. I think they tossed it because somebody tried cutting something too hard and they wrinkled the blade. Still cuts. Cuts just fine. Especially nice for shortening hoses. Does a great job. The only thing I don't like about these little hose clamps is they're metric. I mean, they've got a screw slot in them, so I can still use them. But, come on, guys. You're selling them in the U.S. I put a fuel shut off here on the side of the carburetor. That way I can just shut the fuel off when the engine's not running. Don't have to worry about it flooding out the engine and filling the oil pan. It's the morning after. I got the whole thing put together, got it started and running last night. And the camera sat there making me think it was running, and actually the card was filled up, so nothing recorded. Came out this morning to show you just exactly what happens when you're trying to start it. Turn the fuel on, pull the choke out, open the throttle. Success! Now I just got to put all the shrouding back on it. At first I'm going to set the mower deck underneath it. But that'll be tomorrow's video. I'm just happy I got it running to show you, because really disappointed when the camera died. If you have any suggestions for a new video, questions about today's video, or any of the other videos on the channel, just drop a note in the comments. You know I read them all. Chances are good I'm going to actually get to mow today. That'll be a pleasant thing.